Night in Charlotte always had its own rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, the constant hum of I-77 and I-85 rolled like blood through the city's arteries. Downtown, bars and restaurants glowed with neon light, laughter spilling into the streets. But in the residential neighborhoods, silence pressed in, broken only by the drone of air conditioners fighting the September heat of North Carolina. Lately, that silence had become unbearable for Jacob Ellis. Too thick. Too tense. The house he shared with his wife, Emily, should have been a haven. It had everything: a spacious kitchen with a polished island, a cozy living room with a wide sofa, a small backyard where a young maple tree, planted by Jacob's own hands 5 years earlier, reached for the sky. But every corner of that house now seemed to watch him, whispering of something he couldn't quite name. He couldn't explain it precisely. He just felt it. Late again, Jacob said one evening as Emily came through the door close to 10. Her workday at the advertising agency ended at 6. She smiled, too quickly, too stiffly. Tossed her purse onto a chair, almost theatrically casual. "Client from Atlanta," she replied. Things ran long. "You know how it is." Jacob nodded, but said nothing. He only noticed how her eyes flicked aside, avoiding his gaze. The details piled up. Her phone, now always placed face down on the table. Sudden business trips to nearby cities. The unfamiliar perfume she wore, one he had never given her and never smelled in their house before. Jacob wasn't the kind of man who nitpicked. He loved Emily. After 8 years of marriage, he had always believed their bond was strong, almost unshakable. But lately, something in her had shifted, and the shift gnawed at him. On Saturday morning, he made breakfast: cheese omelets, toast, coffee strong enough to cut through the heavy air. Emily walked into the kitchen wearing a robe, her hair still damp from the shower. She looked tired, though she'd slept nearly 10 hours. "Morning," Jacob said, keeping his tone even. "MHM," she murmured, pulling her phone from her robe pocket. Her fingers began tapping almost immediately. Jacob caught a glimpse of the name flashing on the screen: Michael. A name he had never heard from her before. "Who's that?" he asked, forcing casualness into his voice. Emily flinched, then smiled too brightly. "Just a client. Nothing important." And there it was again, that sidelong glance, like she was rehearsing her lies in a mirror before speaking them aloud. That night, Jacob stepped into the backyard. He sat on the wooden bench beneath the maple tree and lit a cigarette, a habit he had promised himself, and Emily, that he'd quit years ago. Smoke curled upward as he stared at the warm light glowing in their bedroom window. Emily paced inside, phone pressed to her ear. He couldn't hear the words, only the sound of her laughter. Once, that laugh had been his favorite comfort. Now it sounded different, directed somewhere else, belonging to someone else. A sticky, heavy unease settled in his chest. He thought back to his friend Tom, who had gone through a divorce 3 years earlier. Tom's wife had also started with late nights at work and weekend conferences. Jacob had listened to those stories back then, shaken his head, and told himself, that could never happen to me. Emily isn't like that. Now he wasn't so sure. The next morning, temptation won. When Emily went into the shower, she left her phone on the nightstand. Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it. The screen lit up with a message. A new one from Michael. His heartbeat thundered so loud he barely heard the running water. He reached out, hesitated. To touch that phone would mean breaking the trust he'd always prided himself on. He was a man who didn't snoop, who didn't question without cause. But what if trust was just a convenient kind of blindness? He picked up the phone. The lock screen appeared. Password required. Jacob cursed under his breath. Emily had never used a lock code before. That alone felt like confirmation. Not evidence, but a signal. When she emerged from the bathroom, hair wrapped in a towel, Jacob was sitting by the window with the newspaper spread across his lap. His eyes scanned lines he couldn't even see. Inside, questions clawed at him. "You look tense," she said, pausing in the doorway. "Everything okay?" Of course, Jacob answered without looking up. But something inside him had already cracked. Charlotte's late summer mornings carried a particular weight. The air clung to the skin, heavy with humidity, promising another day where shirts stuck to backs and car interiors turned into ovens. Jacob drove to work along South Boulevard, his truck's AC blasting at full force. He was a construction project manager, overseeing a team renovating a block of condominiums near Uptown. Normally, he liked the job, the rhythm of schedules, the satisfaction of progress measured in concrete and steel. But lately, focus slipped from him like water through fingers. All he could think about was Emily's phone. The way it demanded a password now. The way Michael had appeared and refused to leave. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as he recalled her quick smile, the little flinch when he asked who it was. A client? Maybe. But why the lock screen? Why the new perfume? Why the laughter that no longer belonged to him? That evening, when he came home, Emily was already there. She stood in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of red wine, the bottle half gone. "You're early," she said, glancing at him. "Traffic wasn't bad," Jacob replied. He kicked off his boots, his eyes flicking to her phone on the counter. Again, face down. Always face down. "What's for dinner?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I ordered Thai. It should be here soon." She sipped the wine, then leaned against the counter, scrolling quickly. Jacob noticed how her thumb hovered protectively, shielding the screen from his view. "Work crazy?" he asked. She gave him a half-smile. "Always." That night, after Emily fell asleep, Jacob lay awake staring at the ceiling. The ceiling fan spun slow circles, each rotation whispering the same thought, "You need to know." So he started small. The next morning, before heading to work, he checked the call log on their shared phone bill. Emily's number showed repeated calls and texts to one contact, same area code, but not a saved name. Dozens, at all hours. Jacob's chest tightened. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it painted a picture. He tried to focus on work, but suspicion followed him like a shadow. At lunch, he met his friend Tom, the same Tom who'd gone through the bitter divorce. They sat outside a deli on Tryon Street, eating sandwiches while city buses roared past. "You don't look good, man," Tom said, eyeing him carefully. Jacob exhaled. "Emily's, different lately. Distant. Secretive." Tom leaned back. "Different how?" "Phone locked. Late nights. A guy named Michael." Tom gave a slow nod, his jaw tightening. "I hate to say it, but that's how it starts. You know my story." Jacob stared at the cars streaming by, his appetite gone. "I don't want to jump to conclusions." Tom's voice softened. "Then don't. But don't ignore the signs either. If she's hiding something, it'll come out. Always does." 2 nights later, Jacob got his first real clue. Emily had said she was going to a networking mixer downtown. She dressed sharp, black dress, heels, makeup he hadn't seen her put that much effort into in months. After she left, Jacob sat in the living room for 20 long minutes, the clock ticking louder with each second. Then he grabbed his keys. He drove into Uptown, parking 2 blocks from the Marriott where she'd claimed the event was. The streets buzzed with Friday night life, couples spilling out of bars, students laughing too loudly, the faint wail of a siren in the distance. He waited in his truck, eyes locked on the hotel entrance. At 8:47, Emily appeared. Not alone. She walked out with a man, tall, dark hair, dressed in a fitted blazer. They were laughing. She touched his arm lightly as they crossed the street. Jacob's got twisted at the sight. The man leaned closer, saying something that made her smile, that smile, the one she used to save for Jacob. Jacob's hands clenched around the steering wheel. He wanted to storm out, demand answers, drag her home. But he forced himself still. Watching. Waiting. They turned the corner together, heading toward a quieter stretch of South Tryon. Jacob's heart pounded as he started the engine, headlights off, trailing from a distance. By the time he got back home that night, Emily was already there. She was curled on the sofa, barefoot, sipping tea, as if she'd been there all evening. "How was the mixer?" Jacob asked, voice carefully neutral. She looked up, her expression calm. "Fine. Long. I'm exhausted." Jacob swallowed hard. Her lie slid out so smoothly it chilled him. Later, in the bathroom, Jacob splashed cold water on his face. His reflection in the mirror looked older than he remembered, the lines deeper, the eyes heavier. What now? He thought. Do I confront her? Do I wait? But the truth was already clawing at the walls of his marriage. And he knew, it was only a matter of time before the cracks widened into something that couldn't be repaired. The storm broke on a Thursday night. Jacob had been living in a fog of suspicion for weeks, late nights, secret phone calls, the man in the blazer. He had collected enough fragments of truth to build the picture he dreaded. But denial held him hostage, convincing him to wait, to watch, to bleed slowly. Until now. Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she showered. Jacob glanced at it, already knowing what he'd find. The name lit up the screen, Michael. A preview of the message appeared before the screen dimmed. Can't stop thinking about last night. Friday. Jacob's body went cold. There it was. Not suspicion. Not hints. The truth, bold and undeniable. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself bore witness to the collapse of their marriage. When Emily came downstairs, toweling her hair, she froze at the sight of Jacob holding her phone. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned with a calmness that was far more terrifying than rage. I read it, Jacob said simply. Her mouth opened, closed. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she tried to plaster it over with a careful mask. Jacob. Don't, he cut her off, voice low. Don't insult me with another lie. Silence stretched. Only the hum of the refrigerator filled the space. Finally, Emily sat down at the table, her hands clasped. She didn't deny it. Didn't invent another excuse. Just whispered, I never meant to hurt you. Jacob laughed bitterly. You never meant. Emily, you've been living two lives right under this roof. And I've been the fool feeding the lie. Her eyes shimmered. It just happened. I felt seen again. I felt alive. The words hit him like a hammer. All those nights he'd worked overtime to pay for their home, all the little sacrifices he made, the loyalty, the trust, it all meant nothing. That night, Jacob packed a suitcase. The maple tree in the backyard swayed against the window as he zipped it closed. Emily stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Where will you go? She asked. Jacob paused. Somewhere I don't hear laughter that doesn't belong to me. He walked past her, each step heavy but certain. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt a strange clarity. The divorce came quickly. Charlotte's family courthouse processed it with the same sterile efficiency as any other case. Papers signed, assets divided, names scratched off joint accounts. Emily cried once, outside the courthouse. Jacob didn't. His grief had calcified into something colder, harder. He wasn't sure if he could ever forgive, but he knew he wouldn't forget. Months later, Jacob sat on the same wooden bench beneath the maple tree, cigarette smoke curling into the crisp winter night. The house behind him was quiet, his alone now. The silence still pressed in, but it no longer mocked him. It was his silence. His space. He thought of Emily, of Michael, of the life that had cracked like glass under pressure. Then he let the thought drift away, like the last trail of smoke dissolving into the dark Carolina sky. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt free.